All right, I will say good morning. Let us begin by thanking our sponsor, TALMUD TORAH sponsors for the month of Av. To thank Max and Brenda Lapkovsky for dedicating the shiurim this month in honor of the upcoming bar mitzvah of their son Yitzchak Meir. To thank Dr. Riva Mitzner for dedicating the shiurim this month, the commemoration of the first yarzheit of her father, Dr. Aryeh Ben Chaim, Zichron Livracha, and Jack Bennett for dedicating the shiurim in memory of Sargent Cmr TAVIV, who was killed on the Gaza border on May 12th, 2021. We also thank our Week of Learning sponsors, Shmuel Shira Artman, in honor of the birth of a baby girl to Jesse and to Rivkah Meyerowitz. We hope that Emir Tashan, the Meyerowitz Mishpacha, is Zocha, the Gadol Torah, the Chuppah, or the Maisim Tovin. And also with that, let us begin. So we have the great Zichos today to begin the third parak of Masechah Succah, the parak of Lulav Hagazol. Now, what's exciting now about many of the coming dapim is that we will begin to learn the halachos concerning the daled minim. You know, what goes ahead and makes the daled minim, the lulav, the esrog, the hadassim, and the aravos, what makes everything kosher, what represents ultimately a psul, and everything in between. So with that, let us begin. So today's daf is Lamed 30. We are picking up at the Mishnah on Chav Tes Amud Beis 29b. Says the Mishnah, Lulav Hagazol. If you have a lulav that is stolen, now what's going to happen over here is the Mishnah is going to go through a list of things which invalidate a lulav. So let's go. So the bottom line is all of these things that are going to be mentioned all make the lulav pasul. But let's kind of analyze them one by one. So number one is a stolen lulav hagazol. Take a look at Rashi. Gazel. So actually we don't have to right. Gazel, pasul or psul ulakachtem lochem ksiv mishalachem. So we'll say many of these things that Rashi says over here we're actually going to see in the Gemara, but it's key to look at it over here also. So Rashi says, what's the problem with using a stolen lulav? So the Torah says ulakachtem lochem. You shall take for yourselves, which indicates to us what? That a lulav must belong to you. So therefore, again, if you use a stolen lulav, that by definition is an invalidation. So that's number one. Number two, yavesh, a dried up lulav. Now, what dried up means is always something very interesting to note. We'll have to analyze that because there's always some level of brown on the lulav. The presence of something brown on the lulav does not indicate that it's yavesh, but how much brown could a lulav have, we'll discuss. So look at Rashi. What's wrong with the dried up lulav? Deba'inon mitzvah mehuderes, dechsev va'anvehu. So we'll say this is very interesting. So the psul of a dried up lulav is a psul in hider mitzvah. Hider mitzvah means that I have an obligation to go ahead and beautify my performance of mitzvos. Where is the concept of hider mitzvah learned from? From Az Yashir, when Klal Yisrael says, Ze keli va'anvehu, this is my God and I will exalt him. So the Gemara darshans, hisna'eh, anvehu, it's a play on words, hisna'eh, the fun of the mitzvos. Make your mitzvos beautiful. So this is very interesting, I will say, because when we think about hider mitzvah, right, what's hider mitzvah? How do you view, conceptually, how do you view hider mitzvah? It's an extra. It's a hosafa. It's an add-on. The absence of hider mitzvah, does that invalidate the mitzvah? So the Pashtus, we assume no. Yet, interestingly enough, the Gemara is saying over here that a dried up lulav is going to be pasul. Why? Because it lacks hider, right? It lacks hider. It lacks beauty. It lacks beauty and therefore it's pasul. Again, like I said, we'll analyze obviously all of this in the Gemara. Next, so lulav hagazol yavesh pasul. So you have a dried up lulav. You have ultimately again a stolen lulav. It is pasul. Now, very interesting. Shel ashera v'shel ir anidachas pasul. If you have a lulav of an ashera tree, so we're quite familiar with this. Remember again, the ashera tree was a tree that was worshipped for avodah zarah, for idolatry purposes. So if you go ahead and you have a lulav of an ashera tree, or of an ir anidachas, now we'll say an ir anidachas is a condemned city because all of the inhabitants worshipped idolatry. What do you do with an ir anidachas? You wipe it out. You wipe it out and you go ahead and you wipe out the inhabitants, but you also go ahead and totally destroy all of the possessions. So this is very interesting. So what's the nature of the psul of a lulav that comes from an ashera or a ir anidachas? If you look at Rashi, so v'shal ir anidachas, Rashi says for ashera we'll see why. But Irani Dachas, very interesting, Mishum de la Sreifa Kai. Because remember again, as we just mentioned before, anything in an Irani Dachas has to be burned. Well, watch this. T'chsiv, ves kol shlala, tik boats, velulav boy shir dalid tfochim. V'chevan da haylis Sreifa Kai, ein shi'ura kayim de kisar dali. So this is fascinating. So also we're going to see that there's a minimum shear of a lulav. What that minimum shear is, we'll discuss. When something is part of an Irani Dachas, it has to be destroyed. Because it has to be destroyed, therefore Rashi says the equivalent is, or in essence, it lacks the shear. You hear this interesting idea? Because it has to be burned, by definition, it doesn't have the requisite shear to make the lulav kosher. That's the problem with Irani Dachas. So it's really interesting. The lulav itself, in essence, could conform to all of the details that make a lulav kosher. But because it comes from an Irani Dachas, and everything in the Irani Dachas is condemned to be burned, it's as if that lulav is burned, and therefore lacks the requisite shear to make a kosher lulav. So really a very interesting idea. Inherently it's fine, but status-wise, it does not possess the requisite, details or qualities in order to go ahead and be a kosher lulav. Again, we'll expound on that in the Gemara. Niktam rosho, interesting cases now. What happens if the top of the lulav is snipped off? So literally, the top was cut off. Or nifritzu olav. So we'll say nifritzu olav, Rashi says over here. So first of all, Rashi says niktam rosho, pasal delo havi hadar. Once again, Rashi says, if the top of the lulav is chopped off, the lulav is pasal. Why? It's not hadar. It's not beautiful. So again, I'll say same question as we had before. It's interesting. It's interesting because at the end of the day, although we're familiar with the concept of hider mitzvah usually view as an add-on, not usually as something integral to the mitzvah. Again, we'll analyze. Nifritzu alav, Rashi says over nifritzu alav, mishedra ve'ino mechubarn ela ayide aguda, kirufya. So we'll say in this case over here, the leaves, remember we're going to discuss that a lulav essentially has a number of parts, but for our purposes right now, there's a shedra, which is the thick spine. And if you look at the way a lulav is set up, the leaves, or the branches, we'll call them the leaves, come off the spine. What happens if all of the leaves were detached from the spine, but you tied them back together? That's the case ultimately again of nifritzu olav. The leaves came off, you tied them back together to the spine of the lulav. Pasal. Ultimately again, the lulav is pasal. Nifridu olav. What happens if halacha lemaisa, the leaves didn't come off, but the leaves what? Separated out. So remember again, a lulav over time, we're going to discuss what ends up happening is the leaves go ahead and grow outward. So you always say when we get a lulav for Sukkot, we are getting an immature palm branch. Right? That's immature. You can see this all the time. Right? You can see this, that if you look at palm trees, so the way it works is when you leave the palm branch on the tree, what ends up happening is over time the leaves grow apart and then they stiffen like that. They stay hard like that. So the case over here, so nifritzu olav means the leaves came off, you tied them back together. Nifridu olav means essentially the leaves are beginning to separate. They're beginning to separate. They're still attached to the spine, but they're beginning to separate. So what's the halacha? Kosher. In that case, ultimately, again, the lulav is still kosher. And again, we'll discuss all of this. Rashi says over here, nifridu olav michubarn hin b'shedra ela shalamala hin nifradin lekan lekan ka'anfe ilan. Good. So they're still attached to the spine, but ultimately, again, now they're beginning to grow outward. Rabbi Yehuda says, yagdeno milamala. If you have a lulav whose leaves are growing outward, so again, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't disagree with the Tanakama. The lulav is still going to be kosher. But what? You really should tie the leaves together. In other words, tie the lulav in a way that the leaves are brought back tight to the shedra. Tzine har barzel ksheros. So what's it? Tzine har barzel are lulavim that come from this place called Har Barzel. It's just the name of a location. Ultimately, again, they're kosher. Well, see in the Gemara why exactly we need to discuss this. Tzine har barzel kosh ksheros lulav sheyesh po shlosha tfachim kedei lena'anea bo kosher. And we'll see now the Mishnah ends off by saying that halacha l'maisa, if you have a lulav that has a minimum height of 3 tfachim, that's kosher. Why? Because if it has 3 tfachim, you can shake it. Now we'll discuss exactly what the requisite share for lulav is. If we hold like that, if we don't hold like that, we shall see. But if you look at Rashi, Rashi says over here, Mefarish Bigmar Shlosha Tfachim Tei Shedra Keneged Arako Shal Hados V'Tefach Yosef Gedele Na'anea Tebainon Ni'inua Kedel Kamon Ma'ala Umorid Molich Umevi. So also one of the interesting things that we're going to do is we are going to solve the age-old question about how much shake do you really have to have, right? Because you see some people, mamish, go to, I will tell you, as someone who spends a lot of time on Lulav and Esrogim, when I see people who really go nuts on the shaking, right, it sends shivers up my spine, up my lulav spine and my physical spine, because the best way to passel your lulav very quickly is to go nuts on the shaking. Now again, what we'll discuss, halach l'maisa, what do you have to do? Is there a mitzvah to shake? Is there a mitzvah just to move it in different directions? But in any event, the Mishnah says over here that the shir for lulav, interestingly enough, means it has to be 3 tfachim. We're going to see it's not really 3 tfachim. It should be more than 3 tfachim, but it has to be long enough so that there is the ability to shake the lulav. Again, we'll see more in the Gemara regarding that. Incredible. We'll say, let's come to the Gemara. Now what we're really going to focus on today, really for the majority of today's sugya, is the opening line of the Mishnah of lulav hagazel v'hayavesh. And really this is going to be a fascinating sugya. So says the Gemara, Kapasik v'tani, loshna b'yam tav rishon, v'loshna b'yam tav sheni. Now, we'll say, so the Gemara makes an interesting observation that when the Mishnah says that you can't use a lulav that is stolen or that is dry, it just says pasal. Now, the Mishnah makes no distinction. Are we talking about the first day of Yom Tiv? Are we talking about the second day of Yom Tiv? Now, we'll say, now the Gemara doesn't say it explicitly. We'll see it a little bit later inferred in Rashi. But you understand, of course, as follows: that remember, halacha l'maisa, there is only a mitzvah da'oraisa, biblical obligation to take the lulav and esrog on day number 1, right? Because very simply, the pasuk says, "Ulakachtem lochem bayom harishon." You shall take on the first day. Kapos tamarim, anafetz abos, arvei nachal. Right? Torah then says, take all the daled minim. I skipped. Right? So you have to only biyom harishon. The rest of the days that we take lulav and esrog are d'Rabbanan, are rabbinic. Again, we'll discuss the nature of the d'oraisa versus the d'Rabbanan, what they did in the Beis Hamikdash, what we later on now do outside of the Beis Hamikdash. We'll discuss all of that. But for now, first day is d'oraisa, rest of the days are d'Rabbanan. So the Gemara says it's interesting that the Mishnah makes no distinction between day 1 and the rest of the days, which sounds like, for example, a lulav that is dried out or a lulav that is stolen is going to be pasal on any day. In other words, it doesn't make a difference the day. So, kapasik v'tani, lo shna b'yam tav rishon, lo shna b'yam tav sheni. So, let's analyze this. Bishlama yavesh hadar ba'inon v'leka. I understand why a lulav that is dried out is going to be pasal, because ultimately, again, hadar, it lacks hider, right? It lacks halachic beauty or mitzvah beauty. Therefore, it is going to go ahead and be pasal. Look at Rashi. Bishlam yavesh pasal b'drabban or psul b'drabban nami kevan the mitzvah he who mishum zecha lemikdash ba'inan hider mitzvah. So I'll say this is actually very interesting. So what's happening over here is like this. Remember, we said before, how could it be that a mitzvah would be pasal because it lacks hider? Hider mitzvah seems to be like it's gravy. Excuse me for saying that, right? It's like icing on the cake. It's something additional. So Rashi says something very interesting over here. Rashi says, when we take the lulav outside of the base, when we take lulav outside of the Beis Hamikdash, that is a mitzvah zecher lemikdash. Again, we'll see all of this in the Gemara, but it is a mitzvah zecher lemikdash. So Rashi suggests that any time you have a mitzvah that is zecher lemikdash, by definition that requires hider. It's almost as if there's an additional element of hider when it comes to mitzvos zecher lemikdash. So really quite interesting. Again, we'll expound on that in just a little bit. So the Gemara says, I understand why yavesh is an invalidation on any day, because lulav on the first day and even on the rest of the days is zecher lemikdash. Well, first day is d'oraisa. Rest of the days are zecher lemikdash. So if it's not hadar, right, if there's no beauty in it, it's invalid. If the Gemara says, furthermore, ela gazel, what about a stolen lulav? Bishlam yom tav rishon dichsiv lochem mishalochem. Ela b'yamtiv sheni amaylo. So the Gemara says, I understand why a stolen lulav is invalid on the first day. Why? It has to be yours. But why should a stolen lulav be puzzled the rest of the days of Yom Tiv? It's a good kasha. There's no din of lochem. We know this. We know this, right? Because again, remember, it's such a big deal if you don't have your lulav and esrog. On the first day of Yom Tiv, there's a whole process you have to go through. It's not just enough to borrow. It has to be a matana, right? It could be a matana manas lahachzir, a gift on the condition to give. There's a whole bunch of hoops you have to jump through if you have to borrow, if you have to use someone else's lulav and esrog. That only applies on day one. The rest of the Yom Tiv, if you want to borrow, you don't have to start. Are you giving it to me as a gift? Do I really own it? Can I own it on the condition to give it back? You could just borrow it. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. A stolen lulav, I got it. It's not yours, and therefore halacha l'maisa, you can't use it first day. But the Gemara is actually entertaining the possibility. Why can't I be yarzheit the mitzvah? Why can't I be yarzheit the mitzvah with the stolen lulav the rest of the Yom Tiv? Then I will say, sometimes we see something like this, we say to ourselves, what, really? You're stealing a lulav? You want to be yarzheit the mitzvah? What a hypocrite. What a hypocrite. So I will say, a little bit of an important news flash. We're all a shtickle hypocritical. Right? All of us are hypocritical. In other words, the nature of the human condition is to be hypocritical. Meaning what? On one hand, I do mitzvahs, and I also do plenty of averos. Right? So what does that mean? My mitzvahs aren't meaningful because I do averos, or because I go ahead and I do something good, but I do something really bad. Does the really bad thing overturn and undo the really good thing? No, that's the nature of the human condition. We all live with inconsistencies. We all live with a little bit of hypocrisy, simply because I'm not perfect. But the imperfections that I have do not go ahead and obscure or undo the good that I commit. So the guy might be a thief, but he still wants to come to shul with his lulav and esrog. Right? So again, this is his inconsistency. So the Gemara says over here, why should it be a problem to use a stolen lulav the rest of Yom Tiv? So this is great. This is great. Amr Rabbi Yochanan mishum b'shem Bayachai mishum tap of lamed mishum dahavele mitzvah haba ba'avera. Wow. Well, so here we are introduced to this fascinating sugya. Do you know why you can't do this? You can't use a stolen lulav because it is a mitzvah haba ba'avera. Literally, it is a mitzvah that is performed through the commission of a sin. The way you are performing the mitzvah of lulav and esrog is you are stealing the lulav. You're stealing the lulav. Therefore, it is a mitzvah haba ba'avera. And I will say, how do you know that a mitzvah haba ba'avera is problematic? How do I know that? Shneck, because he quotes over interestingly enough the pasuk from Malachi. So I'll say the notion of mitzvah haba ba'avera is actually not a d'oraisa concept, but rather it is, we learned that from the Navi. So the Gemara says as follows. So the Navi says, Navi Malachi says, V'havesim gazul v'es hapiseach v'es hachola. So the Navi is lamenting ultimately. He says you bring the guzzle, the stolen animal, the piseach, the blind animal, and the sick animal. So the Navi is saying, you bring all of these pathetic like animals to my Beis Hamikdash. So the Gemara says something amazing. The Gemara says, guzzle domin de piseach. Now it's interesting that we are mentioning a stolen animal in the same line as what? As the blind animal. Ma piseach les leitakanta. Just like a blind animal, there's no remedy for a blind animal. In other words, it's puzzle. It's ineligible for use as a carbon. Af guzzle les leitakanta. So too again, if an animal is stolen, there is no remedy. In other words, you can't use that animal. Why not? This becomes what's called a mitzvah haba ba'avera. So look at Rashi, af gazel, yalfinan minei de'eno takana la'achar zman, va'afilu b'yesh, we'll see this, well, actually we'll get to this in just a moment. So we'll say, the Gemara just adds in over it, so we'll say, interestingly enough, the concept of mitzvah haba ba'avera, learned that from Malachi, that the Navi says, you're bringing stolen animals, you're bringing blind animals, equates what's stolen to blind, just like blind is an irrevocable pagam. Right? You can't go ahead and offer it up. There's no way to remedy that. So too, if it's stolen, there's no way to remedy that as well. Mitzvah haba ba'avera. Now the Gemara just says, interestingly enough, lo shna lifnei yeyush v'lo shna la'achar yeyush. One more interesting qualifying statement over here. We seem to make no distinction between before yeyush and after yeyush. So I'll say very exciting. A little bit to many of us, this brings us back to our yeshiva days. when we were young and learning about the Yeush. So remember again, we'll say the Gemara says it makes no difference before Yeush and after Yeush. So remember Yeush is the concept of relinquishing ownership rights. So technically speaking, if a person loses an object or an object is stolen, once they relinquish ownership rights, halacha l'maisa, another person is able to acquire that particular item. So the Gemara says, interestingly enough, it appears that a stolen lulav is going to be problematic, whether it is before Yeush or after Yeush. We'll get into that in just a moment. Look at Rashi. Af gazel. Yafina minei de'in lo takana la'achar zman. So again, we learn that from the Navi Malachi that once you have a stolen lulav, it can't be used even later on. Vafidu b'Yeush. Even if the owners gave up hope of ever recovering it, Dishamina leila marei demiyayish. Va'avar vay le lichisar kis. And this is true again. What does it mean, Yeush? Let's say you steal the lulav from Ruvain, and you hear Ruvain say, I'm never going to get it back. Right? That's called Yeush. So now you've just heard that the owner is Yeush. Now, interestingly enough, what happens after an owner is miyayish? Technically speaking, the thief acquires. Now, I'm simplifying a more complex discussion, but technically, the thief acquires once the owner has Yeush. Rashi says over here, so we'll say this is incredible, absolutely incredible. What the Gemara is saying is like this: there is a way to construct a case where you steal a lulav and what? It's actually legally yours. You could have a case like that, where let's say technically you steal the lulav, the owner has Yeush, you know he has Yeush. On a technical level, again, you could become, we'll call it the titular owner of that lulav. Quite interesting. Yet you still can't use it. Why can't you use it? Mitzvah haba ba'avera. See, even though, here was right, this is fascinating, no? Am I the only one who finds this fascinating? Yeah. Okay, good. No, so again, I just want to point out something amazing. You could satisfy the biblical criteria of lachem. So it's yours. But because it's yours through an avera, therefore ultimately it's not good. Therefore the pasuk in Malachi says, so it's interesting, I'm satisfying the pasuk in the Torah of lachem, I'm not satisfying the pasuk in Malachi of mitzvah haba ba'avera, and therefore I won't be yotzei with this lulav. Pretty incredible. We'll come back to the Yeush piece. Bishlama lifnei Yeush. So let's go back for just a moment. I understand if I can't be yotzei with a stolen lulav before Yeush, because after all, again, before Yeush, remember, why not before Yeush? Because what was the status of the item before Yeush? It belongs to the owner. Right? So I understand that doesn't work. Why? Adam kiakriv mikem amarachmana. Because we'll say, for example, when it comes to karbanos, the Torah says, anytime you're bringing something to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Adam kiakriv mikem. If you bring something from yourself, which means you have to own it. To bring it to God, you have to own it. And at the end of the day, if you steal a lulav and the owner has not yet had Yeush, it's not yours. V'lav yidehu. But I don't understand. If I stole a lulav and I know that the owner already had Yeush, ha kanye b'Yeush. Have I not acquired the object through Yeush? In other words, we'll say, it sounds strange. Yes, I committed an Avera. I have to deal with the Avera. But Lamais, at the end of the day now, the owner had Yeush. Once he has Yeush, I become the owner of the item. Why can't I fulfill the mitzvah with the item? Rather, we'll say, what do you see from here? Like I just said before. Even though technically speaking, alt the halachos of gezel, of theft, technically speaking, you are the owner of this stolen lulav because the owner experienced Yeush. The problem now is not a problem of ownership. Interestingly enough, the ownership sounds strange, but the ownership piece is squared away because the owner had Yeush. So it's yours, meaning the thief belongs to the thief. The problem over here is mitzvah ba'avera. And you can't be yotzei the mitzvah of lulav through a mitzvah haba ba'avera. Pretty incredible. Vam Rabbi Yochanan, I will say, you understand like that, the hashkafa of mitzvah haba ba'avera is also quite beautiful, is quite fascinating. That in Yiddishkeit, essentially, it's not just the results that matter. It's the process that matters just as much. Right? Because if process didn't matter, then mitzvah ba'avera would be absolutely fine. Because at the end of the day, I reached the finish line. I accomplished the mitzvah. The objective has been actualized. But the fact that mitzvah ba'avera is puzzle tells me that the Ribono Shel Olam is not simply results-oriented. He's exceptionally process-oriented as well. And if the process is fundamentally flawed, then ultimately it undermines the very spiritual underpinnings of the particular endeavor or initiative. An incredible yisod. So also continuing on this theme of mitzvah ba'avera, Ki ani Hashem ohev mishpat sonei gezel ba'ola. What does it mean when the pasuk says, I am Hashem, I love justice, I love mishpat, sonei gezel ba'ola, I despise theft when it comes to the ola. Ola refers to the ola offering. What does that mean? But this is incredible. So mashallah malach basar v'dam shehaya over al beis hamechas. Well, let's listen to this. They give a mashal. A king, if you could imagine, who was going through a toll booth. He's going through a toll booth. So what happens? So the king says to his driver, pay the toll. Pay the toll. So they say to the king, I don't think you have to pay the toll. Right? All the money goes to you anyway. You don't have to pay the toll. We'll say this is incredible. So the king says, no, I want my subjects to learn from me. When my subjects see me pay the toll, even though again I don't have to, the money is mine, they'll learn from me to be careful about paying the toll. So to HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Ani Hashem, Sone Gezel Ba'ola. I am Hashem, and I despise Gezel, I despise theft when it comes to the karbanos. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, don't bring stolen animals. Now I will say, now you can make a taina that a stolen karban should be fit for a sacrificial offering. Why? Who are you giving it to? HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Who owns everything anyway? The Ribono Shel Olam. Whether it's me bringing the animal or the rightful owner bringing the animal, at the end, HaKadosh Baruch Hu owns it anyway. So therefore, again, technically speaking, even bringing a stolen karban, stolen olah, should be okay. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, no, I don't want anything stolen. I learned from you many elamdu banai ve'avrichu atzan hagezel. If I, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, am careful with theft, even though what? Everything belongs to me anyway. So at the end of the day, you should be careful with theft as well. So I'll say it's a mashal to illustrate this idea that even though, again, one could have made the, theological or philosophical argument that there should be no problem performing a mitzvah with a stolen object because, hey, it belongs to God anyway. The Ribono Shel Olam says, I don't want anything stolen. And it does all belong to me. I don't want it, and therefore my children, you should learn from me ultimately to be careful with theft. I will say, the mashal is also very powerful. How the mashal teaches us that whether this is from a child rearing perspective, right, for a chinuch perspective, or if a person serves in a leadership perspective, that it never works to say, do as I say. It only works to do or to say, do as I do. Right? That the king says, even the king's got to pay the toll. Because if the king doesn't pay the toll, it just sets the wrong example. If we want our children to live lives in a certain way, or if we're in a leadership capacity and we're trying to influence other people, so we have to model the right behavior. You could talk as much as you want, you could say as much as you want, but at the end of the day, it's all about modeling the correct behavior for those who we want to emulate us. An incredible yisod. Seif Marnami, Amrabi Ami, Yavesh Pasal, Mipnei She'ein Hadar. So that's another beautiful Gemara. So Yavesh, a dried up lulav, is possible because there's no hiddur. There's no beauty in it. Gazel pasal, a stolen lulav is possible. Why? Mishum dahavile mitzvah haba ba'avera. Okay, so we'll say here it's explicit. Again, same sort as we said before, just a bit more explicit over here. You can't use a stolen lulav because it is a mitzvah haba ba'avera. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Opligid Rab Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Nachmani Amar Shmuel. So we'll say this. I'll just point out before we go into machlokes. I'll just give you an interesting maramakum just to think about, because this sugya of mitzvah haba ba'avera is quite a fascinating one. So the Minchas Chinuch discusses this in mitzvah Shin Chaf Hey. Shin Chaf Hey. So we'll say in the Minchas Chinuch. We're not going to go through the whole thing. I just wanted to point out something fascinating. He says, listen to this line. He says, the psul mitzvah haba ba'avera, eino psul be'etzem ha-mitzvah, ela chisaron begavra hamakayim hamitzvah. The minchas chinuch, this is fascinating. I will say, think about this just a moment. Let's for literally 1 minute. Right? We've now just established that a stolen lulav is not kosher. Right? You can't use it. Why? Mitzvah haba ba'avera. Even though, again, it could technically satisfy the criteria of lachem, it's a mitzvah haba ba'avera, you can't use it. So we'll say, why can't I use it? What's the problem? So this is incredible because we see that there's a raging machlokes. Is it a psul in the gavra or the cheftza? Is it that a lulav that comes to my hands through the commission of an avera, that's like a lulav from an asherah tree, right? That's like a lulav from an irani dachas. That's like a lulav whose leaves have fallen off, right? It's just invalid. Or do we say, no. The lulav is absolutely fine. Lulav is absolutely fine. What's the psulin of us? So what's the psulin? The gavra, in the individual. Now I will say, so the minchas chinuch posits, he says, mitzvah haba ba'avera is not a psul in the cheftza. This is incredible. It's not a psul in the lulav. It's a psul in the gavra. It's a psul in you. It's a psul in the thief. We'll say, by the way, there's a great raya for the minchas chinuch. What's the raya? If the owner gets back his lulav, could he use it for sukkahs? Yes. Absolutely. We'll say that's very different than the lulav from an irani dachas, from an asherah whose leaves have fallen. Could anyone be yotzi with that lulav? No. See, it would appear that there's a strong argument for the Sefer HaChinuch, because generally, if it was a psul in the chefza, then no one should be able to be yotze with that lulav. But the fact that at the end of the day, it's just me, the thief, I can't be yotze with that lulav, but the owner can, we just seem to support the Minchas Chinuch's assertion that mitzvah ba'aver is a psul in the gavra, not the psul in the chafza. Again, so just pointing out, it's a riveting machlokes. Shin is minchas chinuch, sefer chinuch, or minchas chinuch. Really, the discussion is shin chaf hey. Have a look. So the Gemara goes weiter. Itmar nami amrav avshi amrav. No, we did that. Upligad Rabbi Yitzchak, and we'll say all of this argues on Rabbi Yitzchak. What does Rabbi Yitzchak say? This is incredible. Don't Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani amar Shmuel lo shana ela b'yom tov rishon. When is there a problem? With lulav hagazel? Only again on the first day of Yom Tiv. However, aval b'yom tov sheni mitoch sheyotze b'shaul yotze nami begazel. But the Gemara says, this is incredible. Absolutely incredible. Rabbi Yitzchak says, now the only problem with a lulav hagazel, stolen lulav, is on the first day. Now I will say, now here's what's interesting. So, Rabbi Yitzchak, but on the rest of the days of Yom Tiv, the same way that you can go ahead and be yotze with a borrowed lulav, you can also what? Be yotze with a stolen lulav. Incredible. They both say, now you have to understand something. It becomes clear, see, what's going to come out is, this machlokes is also about the nature of the psul of a lulav hagazel. You see, it can't be that according to Rabbi Yitzchak must hold, what's the problem with lulav hagazel? What's the problem? Lachem, right? Not mitzvah haba ba'avera. Because if it's mitzvah haba ba'avera, that'll impact the use of the lulav when? Every day. If it's lachem, a problem of ownership, well, lachem is only an issue on the first day. So it sounds crazy, but Rabbi Yitzchak is going to say you can't use a stolen lulav on day one because it doesn't satisfy the criteria of lachem. But you only need to satisfy the criteria of lachem on day one. For the rest of the days of Sukkot, you don't need it at all. So therefore, lachem, I say he would say you could use a stolen. Actually, he's not condoning it or encouraging it, but lamaisa again, you can be yoti with the stolen lulav the rest of the days of Sukkot. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Masir of Nachman bar Yitzchak. So Nachman bar Yitzchak raised the kasha lulav hagazel v'hayavesh pasol. A lulav that is stolen or a lulav that is dried up is pasol. Hashaul, but ultimately again, if it is borrowed, kosher. You can be yotze with a borrowed lulav. So let's analyze this. Emas, when could you be yotze with a borrowed lulav? So the Gemara says, Ilema b'yom tov rishon aksiv lachem. So you can't be yotze with a borrowed lulav on the first day, because on the first day you need lachem. It has to belong to you. Mishal lachem. First white line on the bottom. V'hai lav didehu. And again, obviously, even if I'm borrowing something, this is incredibly important, we'll say, because sometimes a person doesn't have their own lulav. To be yotze this on day number one, it is not enough to borrow a lulav from someone, but rather, again, one has to receive complete ownership of the lulav through the mechanism of a matana, of a gift. This is also very important. Like, even in your own family, let's say a person is going ahead and a person is going ahead and sharing a lulav with adult children, or even with one spouse, right? So on the first day of Yom Tov, if you want the other person to go ahead and be yozeh with it, you have to give it over as a complete matana. Borrowing it does not work. This is why, by the way, interestingly enough, there's a whole shaila about what to do with children on the first day of Yom Tov, because there are opinions that hold that a child has the ability to acquire, but does not have the ability to give over, to be kona, but not to be makna. Therefore, again, the poskim say, a person has to be very careful to only give your child the lulav and esrog on day one, after you have fulfilled the mitzvah. Otherwise, you may have spent a lot of money on a beautiful lulav and esrog, and you're not yotzei. Amazingly enough, you're not yotzei on the doraisa day. So again, we'll get into all of these. So much here. It's absolutely incredible. So the Gemara says, the Gemara says, so when is this? When is it problematic to use a borrowed lulav? So if you're going to say, so if it's Yom Tov Rishon, haksiv lachem. I'm sorry, when can you use a borrowed lulav? It can't be the first day, because it says lachem. Mishal lachem v'hai lav dideyu, ela lav bi Yom Tov Sheni. Rather, it must be talking about the second day of Yom Tov. So the brayso over here must be referring to the second day of Yom Tov. And that's where it says, Vekatani guzzle puzzle. And here as it says, on the second day of Yom Tov, ultimately again a stolen lulav is still puzzle. So this contradicts Rabbi Yitzchak, because Rabbi Yitzchak said, you can use a stolen lulav on the second day, because on the second day you don't need lachem. The brayso clearly seems to indicate that even on the second day you can't use a stolen lulav. To which the Gemara says, no, the olam b'Yom Tov Rishon. Really, the Bryce is talking about the first day of Yom Tov. V'lo mi bai kamar, lo mi bai shol delav didehu. It goes without saying that on the first day of Yom Tov, you can't use a borrowed lulav. Why can't you use a borrowed lulav on the first day of Yom Tov? It's not yours. Aval gozel emastam gzele yeush bailimhi ukidi deidami. This is incredible. Zahavamina. I would have thought you can use a stolen lulav on the first day of Yom Tov. Why? Because it will say, b'pashtos, when you go ahead and you steal a lulav, what happens? The owner gives up hope of ever getting it back. Right? After all, again, lulavim generally don't have a siman, like a real siman, a real identifying mark that you could reclaim it. So once you stole it, the owner gives up hope. On a technical halachic level, what happens when the owner gives up hope of retrieving the item? What happens? You, the thief, acquire it. So I'm going to thought, therefore, again, I do satisfy the criteria of lachem, and I could use a stolen lulav even on day one, kamash malon, that you cannot. So we'll say, so again, that kind of, so it comes out, everyone's going to agree that halacha l'maisa you can't use a stolen lulav. Is it a din in lachem, or is it a problem of mitzvah haba ba'avera? So that's going to be a little bit of a machlokas. And nafkamina will be, can you use a stolen lulav on days 2 through 7? If you hold mitzvah haba ba'avera, you cannot. If you hold mitzvah din and lachem, you can. We're going to see that the majority opinion is going to really take the approach that it's a mitzvah haba ba'avera. And therefore, again, a stolen lulav will pretty much be precluded from use for all 7 days. So the Gemara goes right. Rabbi says it's fascinating. Amar luhu Rav Huna la'ano avankari. So Rav Huna said to the avankari, Rabbi say, are merchants. So he said to the merchants who would sell, they would sell hadassim. He said to them, Ki zavanisu asa me'akum. When you go ahead and you purchase asa myrtle branches, right? When you go ahead and you purchase hadassim from akum, from idolaters, lo tigazazu atzon. So we'll say, what would happen? Merchants would come. They would go buy hadassim from akum, from idolaters. So what would happen? They would go and then the merchants would resell it. So interesting. So Rav Huna said to the merchants, when you go to buy hadassim from the merchants, do me a favor. Don't cut the myrtle branches yourself. Don't cut the hadassim yourself. Ella legazazuha inhu v'yaveluchu. Let the akum cut it for you and give it to you. Right? I'm the merchant. I'm going over to akum. Right? Joe the akum. And what happens? I say, Joe akum, I want to purchase some hadassim from your land. So Joe says, no problem. Rava says, do me a favor. Don't cut it down yourself. Ask Joe the akum to cut it down and give it to you. Why? My taima stam ovdei kochavim gazlani arasaninu. Because unfortunately, again, a stam akum was suspected of stealing real estate, of stealing land. And Rashi says over here, v'shema osa karka mi Yisrael hava, and there was a large possibility that it was or a possibility that it was Jewish land, although it doesn't actually matter if it was Jewish land or not. The karka amabeis, the karka eina nigzeles. That I will say, there is a fascinating dynamic of land. You can't steal land. right? Why can't you steal land? Why can't you steal land? Because it's unmovable, right? It's unmovable. So in other words, part of the dynamics of theft require you to be able to take the stolen object. Because a thief cannot go ahead and take land, therefore there's a klal in halacha, karka eina nigzeles. Land cannot be stolen. Land cannot be stolen. So the Gemara says, the karka eina nigzeles. Hilchach, so we'll say, now watch this. Hilchach, ligozeza inhu. Therefore, you're supposed to say, so what's the concern? Let's play this out. So the akum has land, and there's a concern that he stole the land. So now what's going to happen? What's going to happen if I go ahead and I cut down the myrtle branches? There's the possibility, the Jewish merchant, the possibility that's what? That I am taking myrtle branches from stolen land. Karka ina nigzeles, right? So therefore, again, those are stolen myrtle branches. So what did Rava tell the merchants to do? Hilchach ligazazua inhu. Let the akum cut it down. Ki hechi delehavu yeyosh bailin biadaihu didhu. V'shini harishos biadaihu. Supposed to say this is incredible. So Rava says, in the event that it's stolen, when the akum, so here's the problem. The akum stole the land. The problem is that land cannot be stolen. Because land cannot be stolen, whose possession is it still in? Whose possession is it in? The original owner. The original owner, because you can't steal land. So therefore, again, Rava says, let the akum go ahead and cut down the branches. When the akum goes in and cuts down the branches, now the branches are movable property once they've been detached. Once the branches are in the hands of the akum, we assume that the owner experiences yeyosh, right? He despairs from retrieving it. So now yeyosh has been experienced while the item is in the hands of the akum, and then we add in an additional step of what we call shinoi rishus. Shinoi rishus is when an object changes domain, which is considered to be another step in transference of ownership. So Rava says, don't cut down the myrtle branches yourselves. Don't cut it down yourself, because the concern is that then you are actively engaged or actively involved with a stolen item. Masha'en came, if you let the akum cut it down, the yeyosh occurs in the hands of the akum. Once the yeyosh occurs in the hands of the akum, what's the status of the myrtle branches? What's the status? They belong to the akum. And now again, then once the akum transfers it to you, now there's yeyosh in the hands of the akum, and now there's what's called shinei rishus, change of domain. So that by the time the myrtle branches get to you, they are no longer considered stolen property. Now, I want to point out that Maharsha says, by the way, Rava wasn't encouraging them to do this. In other words, best to, of course, avoid this situation in totality. But the Maharsha says it must have been these were the only myrtle branches that were available, right? Because obviously you never want to get involved with anything that has any suffix of gezel. But if there was no choice, there was no other ability, this was the best way to navigate the difficult situation. So the Gemara says, sof ki gazazu avankari lehavi yeyosh bailim biadayu v'shnei rishus biadan. But 1 second, I don't understand. I can still go ahead and cut out the akum from this. Why? Let the Jewish merchant go, cut the myrtle branches. When he does that, the yeyosh of the owners occurs with the myrtle branches in the hands of the Jewish merchant. And then when the Jewish merchant sells it to the Jew, the shinoi rishus happens in the hands of the Jew. It was like, all we really want, all Rava was saying was, look, let's say we don't know this land to be stolen. Right? We don't know it to be stolen. We're concerned that maybe it's stolen. So Rav is just saying, what we just want to make sure is that before you use those myrtle branches in your lula, before you use those hadassim, we just want to make sure that there was yeyosh and shinui rishos. That's what we want. We want to make sure that there was a situational yeyosh, that the owners gave up any hope, whoever those owners are, of retrieving it, and that there was a change in, what literally shinui rishos means a change of domain, a change of ownership. So the Gemara is saying, Rava was suggesting that by let the akum cut it down. Then when the akum cut it down, yeyosh occurs in the akum's hands. Then the akum transfers it to the merchant, shinoi rishos. To which the Gemara says, even if the Jewish merchants cut it down, let the Jewish merchant cut down the branches, cut down the hadassim. Yeyosh happens in the hands of the merchants, and then what? When the merchants sell it to the end user Jew, that's shinoi rishos. To which the Gemara says, you're right, but but remember, we're talking about now, we'll say not only do the merchants, do the Jewish merchants have to sell myrtle branches, but what? they also have to get their own myrtle branches. So Rava was talking about, again, for when the merchants themselves want to acquire their hadassim that they're going to use. This is the right process. Let the akum cut it down. Let there be, again, yeyosh in the hands of the akum, and then shinei rishus giving it over, and then shinei rishus when the akum or gives it over to the abankari, the merchant. The Gemara says, but I don't understand why don't we say that the hadassim are acquired with what we call shinui maisa. And what shinui maisa means? A change. Rashi says, likane b'shinui maisa, bottom of the page, sha'agad shlosha minim yachad, the shinui maisa namikani. Both say, if you steal something and you change it, that's also a way of acquiring the item. So remember, again, we take the hadassim, and what do we do with the hadassim? We bundle them together with the lulav. That's a shinui maisa. So even if you have to be concerned that for some reason it's stolen, wouldn't the end user acquire it by bundling the hadassim into the lulav? That's a shinui maisa. You're doing something to change the item. To which the Gemara says, Kasara lulav ein sarich agad. Because once we're going to see this machlokes, there's a machlokes whether or not the lulav, the hadassim, and the arabas need to be bound together at all. So it could be that this is reflecting the opinion that holds a lulav does not require binding, does not need to be bound together. And as such, maybe there's no shinui maisa. And even if you want to say that lulav requires and needs to be bound, shinui hachozer lebriyasahu, v'shinui hachozer lebriyasahu lo shmei shinui. It's very interesting. We'll say, even if you want to say lulav has to be bound, and the binding of the different species together is a shinui, any change that has the ability to go out and be easily returned to its previous state is not called a change. Is not called a change. So the agud, right, the binding of everything together could just as easily be what? Be unbound, right? That which is bound could just as easily be unbound, and therefore it's not called a shinui. Viliknuye b'shinui hashem. Why not go ahead and say that you acquire the hadassim ultimately again through a change in name? In other words, a change in identity. Because after all, the meikara habile asa, the hashta top of lamed aleph, hoshana. In the beginning it's called an asa, right? And now it's called the hoshana. I will say now they both mean the same thing, which is myrtle branch. But they're known by different names, to which the Gemara says, meikar nami la asa hoshana kar. They know people call the myrtle branch, they call it a hoshana from the beginning as well. So we'll say, so that kind of ends this story. But again, just to kind of bring out what we have. So what we have over here is we know that a stolen lulav is going to be aser. Why? We have a machlokes. Either it's a problem of lachem or a problem mitzvah haba ba'avera. The nafkamina being, is it just invalid for use on the first day or the entire Yom Tov? Yitzchak holds it's a din of lachem, and therefore Yitzchak actually holds that halacha lamai, so you use a stolen lulav on days 2 through 7. He equates a stolen lulav with a borrowed lulav. It becomes clear, and certainly halacha lamai, so we reject that approach, and we accept the idea that a stolen lulav might also be a problem of lachem, but even if somehow you took care of the problem of lachem, you still have a problem of what? Mitzvah haba ba'avera. Learned out from the concept of malachi. Machlokes is mitzvah haba ba'avera, a din in the chefza, a din in the gavra. I alluded to that. Shinchav hey mincha sinach. You'll take a look at that. The Gemara then just got into the rest of this case because what Rava was teaching was as follows. When he's telling to the Jewish merchants, if you're going to go ahead and buy the hadassim from the akum, you have to be concerned that there's an issue of theft. So in order to go ahead and obviate any concern regarding theft and ensure that my performance of the mitzvah is 1,000% kosher, Rava wanted two things. He wanted yeyosh and he wanted shinui rishus. Yeyosh and shinui rishus. And therefore, again, in Yeyosh, we know that the owner has given up hope of ever retrieving it. Shinui Rishus, a change of domain. And the way Rava said to the merchants to accomplish that is, don't cut down the myrtle branches yourself. Have the akum do it. Because remember, again, you can't say there was Yeyosh with the karka. Why is there no Yeyosh with the karka? Why not? Karka in an exelis, right? You can't steal land, can't steal real estate. And therefore, again, let the akum cut it down. When the akum cuts down, he holds the myrtle branches. Ultimately, again, then there's yeyosh, and when he transfers it over to the Jewish merchant, there's shinui makom. And therefore, again, at the end of the day, once the shinui rishus, and therefore, again, once that arrives at the Jewish end user, there is no doubt about the kashrus of the use of those hadassim. But I will stop over here. Continue tomorrow. Yeah.